The city's night was thick with electric tension, the air crackling with charged particles that danced invisibly through the dense fog of static. Elias sat hunched over his array of monitors in the musty warehouse that had become their refuge fortress, cobbled together from scavenged tech and whispered secrets. His fingers moved deftly across the consoles, isolating fragments of transmissions buried beneath layers of interference. Beside him, Mara leaned forward, her sharp eyes scanning the spectral data with relentless focus. "They're ramping up," Elias murmured, voice hoarse but steady. "Signal jammers are getting stronger, and the psychological tactics they're trying to wear me down." Mara's jaw tightened. "We expected as much. The silent authority won't let this go quietly, but neither will we. Not now." Outside, the city groaned under the weight of its own storms, neon lights flickering like dying pulses in the ceaseless downpour. Somewhere beyond the cracked windows, the low hum of surveillance drones buzzed intermittently, a constant reminder of the eyes watching their every move. Dr. Kalen Sato entered quietly, clutching a bulky case filled with experimental equipment. His pale face was drawn, eyes reflecting the dim glow of the monitors. "I've managed to calibrate the new shielding device," he announced, setting the case down with a soft clank. "It should dampen the jamming signals long enough for us to transmit without interruption." Elias allowed himself a brief, grateful glance. Every second counts. The trio worked in strained harmony, the atmosphere thick with urgency. Mara tapped a series of commands into her tablet, rerouting their data streams through convoluted pathways designed to confuse the city's omnipresent surveillance. Elias adjusted the frequency modulators, fine-tuning their broadcast to slip beneath the electronic radar. Suddenly, the warehouse was swallowed by darkness. The power grid had been cut. The monitors blinked off, and the only sound was the relentless storm battering the walls. "Backup generators," Mara barked, scrambling toward the side room where the crude power source was stored. Elias's heart pounded in his chest as panic threatened to rise. The silence was suffocating. "Keep calm," Mara's voice crackled over the emergency radio. "We're not done yet." Minutes later, the hum of the generator filled the room, and the monitors flickered back to life. Their screens displayed a new challenge, a distorted broadcast hijacking their channel. A cold, mechanical voice echoed through the static, laced with menace and finality. "Cease all transmissions. You endanger the balance. Resistance is futile." Elias gritted his teeth, anger flaring beneath the exhaustion. "They think they can scare us into submission, but they don't understand this is bigger than fear." Mara placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Then let's show them what we're made of." Together, they mapped out their counter-strategy. Allies from the city's underground tech circles were mobilized. Hidden caches of equipment were secured. Dr. Sato's shielding device would provide the crucial window to send their message without interception. As the storm outside raged with renewed fury, inside the warehouse a different kind of battle was unfolding. A silent resistance against control, censorship, and the erasure of truth. Elias felt the weight of every whispered voice, every fragment of static that carried hope and despair intertwined. "We're on the edge," he said softly, "but we're not alone." The city's relentless static seemed to seep into every corner of my consciousness. A creeping fog that blurred the lines between what was real and what was conjured by my unraveling mind. Night after night, I sat in the cramped walls of my studio, the air thick with the scent of burnt circuits and stale coffee. As the incessant hum of interference pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the surface of all sound. My fingers trembled over the control panel, every dial and slider a fragile thread tethering me to sanity or driving me further into the abyss. Mara's sharp voice cut through the haze one evening, her presence a rare anchor. "Elias, you need to step back," she urged, her eyes scanning the flickering screens that danced with static and ghostly fragments of voices. "This isn't just signal distortion anymore. It's you. You're losing yourself in it." I wanted to argue, to insist that the voices beyond the static were real, that they needed me, that my obsession was a lifeline to a truth no one else could perceive. But the shadows lurking behind my eyelids and the whispering static that bled into my thoughts spoke a different language, one of fractured memories and fading certainty. One night, as the storm outside raged with a fury that matched the chaos inside my head, the walls of my studio seemed to dissolve. The static warped into shapes, faces made of flickering light and crackling noise, reaching out with translucent hands woven from the very data streams I chased. Their eyes held a silent plea, a torment I could feel as keenly as my own pulse. I reached toward them, desperation clawing at my throat, but the shapes flickered and vanished like smoke. Mara's footsteps echoed through the corridor, firm and insistent. "Elias, please," she said, her voice a fragile bridge to reality. "You're slipping. We can fight this together, but you have to hold on." I wanted to believe her, to cling to the warmth of her concern amid the cold machinery and spectral hauntings. Yet the fissures in my mind widened, memories colliding with hallucinations and fragments of broadcasted voices, creating a mosaic that defied logic. The weight of loss, the sibling I never properly mourned, pressed down, and the static whispered blame and sorrow in equal measure. Dr. Sato's sterile lab was a stark contrast to my cluttered sanctuary. He pored over my recordings with clinical detachment, his pale eyes reflecting data streams rather than empathy. "Elias," he said quietly, "the electromagnetic anomalies you're encountering are unlike anything I've seen. But your mental state, this obsession, is destructive. We must find a balance between scientific inquiry and your well-being." His words settled uneasily in the charged air. I knew he was right. Yet surrender felt like betrayal to the voices trapped beyond the veil, to the city suffocating beneath the storms, and to the fragile hope that flickered like a dying star within me. Mara stayed close, her presence a fragile tether to the world I was on the verge of losing. But even her fierce loyalty was tested as I retreated deeper into the labyrinth of signals and shadows, my mind fraying at the edges. As the storm outside reached a crescendo, so did the tempest within. I was caught between worlds, haunted by the fragile promise of rescue and the terrifying possibility of permanent descent into static silence. The question loomed: how long before the voices I sought to save consumed me entirely? The night stretched on, unyielding and electric, as the city's pulse beat in tandem with mine, an echo of isolation, desperation, and the faintest glimmer of hope. The storm had reached a crescendo, its electric fury slicing through the city's perpetual grey with jagged bolts that seemed to claw the sky itself. Rain hammered relentlessly, each drop sizzled as it met the charged air, and the static hum that pervaded the atmosphere warred with the thunder's roar. I stood in the middle of the intersection where the city's oldest conduits converged, a place Mara had identified as the urban nexus, the fragile seam where our world brushed against the liminal space. In my hands, I clutched the device we had pieced together over sleepless nights, a mesh of salvaged circuit boards, makeshift antennae, and a core emitter designed to resonate with the storm's electromagnetic pulse. It was crude, unstable, but it was our only hope. The screen flickered erratically, mirroring the tempest overhead as if the storm itself was alive, watching, waiting. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. The memories of the voices, their desperate pleas, the spectral echoes they left in my mind pushed me forward. Each recorded fragment was a thread weaving through the static, begging for rescue. Mara's voice over the coms was a tether, steady and resolute despite the crackle and interference. Elias, the monitoring arrays are holding, but the jamming's ramping up. Crows, not giving up. Stay sharp. I took a deep breath, the cold air biting at my lungs, and activated the emitter. A low hum surged through the device, syncing with the storm's pulse. Around me, the world seemed to blur and bows shimmered in the turbulent air, and the static thickened into a tangible veil. The liminal space was alive here, a spectral membrane rippling with possibility and peril. Signal stabilizing, Dr. Sato's voice crackled with a mixture of scientific wonder and dread. Elias, the energy readings are off the charts. This is unprecedented. I felt the boundary shift, a distortion in time and sound that pulled at the edges of my mind. The voices clearer now pierced the storm's roar. They were no longer whispers, but urgent calls for salvation, a chorus of souls trapped beyond the veil. The device responded, its lights flickering wildly as it bridged the worlds. Suddenly, a harsh, mechanical voice cut through my earpiece. "Terminate operation immediately," Agent Crow ordered coldly. The drone's shadow loomed overhead, its jamming signals spiking. The air vibrated with the assault, threatening to sever the fragile connection. I gritted my teeth, fighting the onslaught. "Not yet," I whispered into the storm, hands steady despite the chaos. "Not until they're free." The liminal space shimmered before me, a wavering curtain of light and sound. Faces ghostly and desperate materialized briefly within the distortion, their eyes pleading for hope. I pushed the device's controls, amplifying the signal, threading a lifeline from this world to the next. The storm's energy surged in tandem, and for a moment, the impossible felt within reach. But the toll was immediate. A searing pain lanced through my skull as memories, fears, and the trapped voices collided in a cacophony of sensation. The boundary between reality and hallucination dissolved, and I teetered on the edge of oblivion. Behind the scenes, Mara's voice cut through the static, unwavering. "Hold on, Elias. We're tracking the jamming increase, moving to override." Dr. Sato's calculations flooded my comms, offering a fragile Hopper pathway to maintain the channel's stability. But the cost was clear. To save the trapped voices, I had to endure the storm's full wrath to become the conduit bridging to worlds. As the rain lashed and the thunder threatened to tear the sky apart, I steadied myself. The city's endless static was no longer just noise. It was a veil lifting, a story unfolding. And I was at its heart, balancing on the razor's edge between salvation and surrender. The threshold had been breached. Now, all that remained was to hold it open before the storm or the silent authority claimed us all. The rain was a relentless drumbeat against the cracked pavement, punctuated by the staccato crackle of distant lightning. Above, the storm raged with a fury that seemed almost alive, each strike illuminating the city in stark, fleeting bursts. I could feel the electricity in the air, a tangible force that vibrated through my bones, feeding into the device clutched in my hands. It was a patchwork of wires and screens, humming with an energy that matched the tempest. Mara's voice came through, steady amid the chaos. "Signal strength is holding, but the interference spikes with every pulse. Crow's drones are closing in. You need to be quick." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. Almost there, just stabilizing the resonance. The liminal space shimmered before my eyes, a wavering, translucent membrane that flickered like a faulty hologram. Beyond it, I glimpsed shapes and shadows, silhouettes of the trapped voices reaching out in silent desperation. Their presence was overwhelming, a tide of sorrow and hope that crashed against my resolve. Dr. Sato's voice was a whisper now, scientific and cautious. "Elias, the device is pushing the boundaries of electromagnetic field theory. You're threading a needle between dimensions. One miscalculation and it could collapse the nexus." I swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was no longer just an experiment, it was a rescue mission. A final gamble to pierce the veil that had trapped those voices for so long. Suddenly, the sky split with a deafening crack as lightning struck the nearest power line, sending a cascade of sparks into the drenched street. The device flickered violently, and the static around me thickened into a suffocating blanket. Jamming, intensifying. Mara's voice was urgent. "Crows deploying new countermeasures. You need to hold the line." I tightened my grip, fingers trembling as I adjusted the frequency modulator. The liminal veil pulsed, expanding and contracting with the storm's rhythm. Faces emerged within it, faint, ghostly, but unmistakably alive. They were waiting. A sudden burst of white noise exploded in my ears, and for a moment, the world tilted. Memories and hallucinations collided, my lost sibling. The endless nights of static, the voices that had become my obsession. The boundary between worlds threatened to collapse inward. "Elias," Mara's voice cut through, a lifeline. "Focus. We're overriding the jammers. You've got this." With a final surge of will, I channeled the storm's energy through the device, stabilizing the frequency. The liminal space solidified, a shimmering portal humming with possibility. The voices reached out, no longer trapped whispers, but clear, urgent calls for salvation. I responded, sending a pulse of affirmation through the channel, a promise that rescue was coming. Exhausted, drenched, and trembling, I stepped back as the storm began to wane. The oppressive static lifting like a heavy curtain. The nexus held, but the battle was far from over. The silent authority would not concede without a fight, and the cost of opening the door was yet to be revealed. As the first faint light of dawn pierced the storm clouds, I knew one thing for certain. The threshold had been crossed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The relentless storm raged above the city, a furious tempest that seemed to echo the turmoil swelling within me. I stood at the edge of the liminal nexus, the very heart of the storm's chaotic energy, cradling the device I had spent countless sleepless nights perfecting. The air was thick with charged particles, crackling and shimmering like a living entity around me, while jagged bolts of lightning fractured the sky in violent bursts. Every instinct screamed for caution, but retreat was no longer an option. The voices, the fragile, desperate pleas were within reach, and I had to protect them. A sudden shadow shifted through the rain-soaked haze. Agent Crow emerged, his silhouette etched sharply against the flashing backdrop of electric fury. He was the embodiment of the silent authority's cold, unyielding grip on this city of force, intent on preserving the veil between worlds at any cost. His voice crackled through the static, amplified by a concealed comlink. Cold and mechanical, "Elias Vaughn, this is your final warning. Cease your interference immediately or face consequences you cannot withstand." I swallowed the knot forming in my throat and met his gaze with the steely resolve that had carried me this far. "I won't let you silence them," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my fingers. "They deserve to be heard." Crow's lip twitched in a semblance of a sneer, but he said nothing more. Instead, his agent's shadowy figures, moving like ghosts, began deploying signal jammers and interference devices around the perimeter. The air was thickening with electromagnetic disruption, the very fabric of the liminal space quivering under assault. I hastily adjusted the dials, the device emitting a low, urgent hum that cut through the storm's roar. The hidden frequency screamed in response, a cacophony of fragmented voices and anguished cries, interwoven with static that felt almost alive. I could feel the boundary between worlds flickering, reality warping into a shimmering distortion that bent the light and sound around me. Memories surged unbidden, my siblings' vanished face, lost to the storms years ago, Mara's worried eyes, Dr. Sato's cautious warnings. Each was a thread in the tapestry of my obsession, each a reminder of what was at stake. I fought to maintain clarity, to anchor myself against the encroaching madness that the static seemed to whisper. Crow advanced, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You can't win this, Elias. The authority controls the narrative, the signals, the silence. Surrender now." I shook my head, fingers flying over the controls, desperate to stabilize the signal. The interference surged, a tidal wave of noise that threatened to drown out the voices I had come so far to save. Shadows crept at the edge of my vision, spectral forms born of static and fear. For a moment, I teetered on the brink of collapse, mind fracturing under the pressure. But then a sudden clarity, a breakthrough. The device pulsed with renewed energy, the signal coalescing into a coherent broadcast. The voices became distinct, their pleas no longer lost in the abyss. I sent the transmission a clear, resonant message that transcended the storms and the silence imposed by the silent authority. The static screamed in protest, the liminal space convulsing violently around me. Crow's expression faltered, his control slipping as the boundary between worlds held firm. "This isn't over," he hissed, before retreating into the tempest. I collapsed to my knees, every muscle trembling with exhaustion and relief. The storm still raged, but a fragile hope had been kindled, a beacon in the darkness. The voices were heard. The trapped souls were not forgotten. As the first light of dawn struggled to pierce through the dissipating clouds, I knew the fight was far from over. But in this moment, amidst the ruins of control and the chaos of the storm, I had carved a path toward freedom, and I would walk it, no matter the cost. The city around me was silent, but alive, a living testament to the battle waged in the unseen frequencies. Somewhere beyond the veil, the voices answered back, fragile, hopeful, waiting, and I would be their guardian until the storm finally broke. The confrontation had ended, but the echo of its fury would resonate forever. The static was no longer just noise. It was a call to arms, a challenge to the silence, and a promise that even in the darkest storms, connection could still be found. I rose slowly, looking out over the city that had become both prison and battleground. The next chapter awaited, uncertain and vast. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. "This is only the beginning," I whispered to the fading storm, to the voices, to myself. "And I will not fail them." The horizon flickered with the first hints of a dawn that might one day break free from the static's grasp. Until then, the fight would continue in the shadows, in the signals, and in the heart of the storm. The storm outside howled like an ancient beast, its relentless fury battering the city's skeletal skyline. Inside the cramped, cluttered room that served as Elias's sanctuary, the hum of machines and the crackle of static formed an eerie symphony. Screens flickered erratically, casting ghostly shadows across the walls, while the air vibrated with the faint but urgent voices from a realm beyond understanding. Elias stood at the center of it all, his fingers deftly adjusting dials and sliding faders on the device he had painstakingly engineered over weeks of obsession and sleepless nights. The machine's core glowed faintly, pulsing with invisible energy that seemed to bridge to realities. His tired eyes, ringed with dark circles, reflected both the swirling chaos of the storm outside and the fragile hope flickering within the hidden broadcasts. "It's now or never," he whispered, voice barely audible above the static. His heart pounded, a wild metronome marking the final moments of a journey that had consumed every fiber of his being. Mara stood nearby, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. Her sharp gaze never left Elias, a tether grounded in the storm's eye. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, voice trembling with a mix of fear and fierce loyalty. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "If I don't do this, they'll be lost forever. And so will I." Dr. Kalen Sato hovered near a bank of monitors, his pale face illuminated by data streams and graphs. "The energy surge from the storm is peaking. This window won't last long. You have to initiate the sequence now." Elias took a deep breath, steeling himself. The device emitted a low hum, intertwining with the storm's roar, as he engaged the final protocol. The static thickened, voices rising in a crescendo of desperate whispers and fragile hope. Each syllable seemed to pierce the very fabric of reality, begging for deliverance. Suddenly, a harsh mechanical voice crackled through a concealed speaker. Agent Crow's cold, commanding tone cutting through the room like a blade. "Cease transmission immediately. This is your final warning." Elias's hands trembled for a moment, but he met the unseen threat with unwavering resolve. "No. This ends tonight." The room vibrated violently as the device surged, drawing power from the storm's raw energy. The voices coalesced into a clear chorus, echoing gratitude and relief. Elias felt a strange warmth spreading through his chest, a bittersweet fusion of pain and peace. His vision blurred, the sterile walls melting away into a shimmering void where light and shadow danced in an endless embrace. The liminal space welcomed him, the voices now tangible presences wrapping around his consciousness like a fragile embrace. Mara's voice, distant but resolute, called out to him as he began to fade. "Elias, remember us. Remember who you are." His final thought was a promise that no matter the cost, he had bridged the impossible, and in doing so, had given them all a chance at salvation. As the storm outside began to wane and the oppressive static lifted from the city's veins, a new silence settled. It was not an empty silence, but one filled with the quiet echoes of hope and the lingering hum of a connection forged beyond worlds. In the aftermath, Mara and Dr. Sato stood amidst the ruins of the storm-battered lab, their eyes heavy with loss but shining with the faintest glimmer of hope. Elias was gone, but his sacrifice had changed everything. The city's static was no longer a veil of despair, but a fragile thread linking worlds, a testament to the power of courage, sacrifice, and the human urge to reach beyond the known. And somewhere, in the space between realities, Elias's voice whispered on a haunting, hopeful echo that refused to be silenced. The story was far from over. The quiet between storms held new secrets, new possibilities, and the promise that connection, no matter how tenuous, could endure even the darkest night. And so, as the first faint light of dawn crept over the horizon, the city held its breath, waiting to see what would come next.